Welcome to TheSystem.ca, the art and science of coaching, providing innovative information on new speed, power, recovery, wellness, strength, and conditioning for both athletes and active individuals. We are having another, a return special guest, Coach Karl Dewazien. And Coach Karl, as some of you know, been following me, is a soccer coach in California that specializes working with youth. And I brought him on because today's topic is the idea of play. And I thought, who better in my Rolodex of people that I know that works with kids? I'm thinking, there's the guy right there. And I worked with a few kids here and there, but not to the same extent day to day, day in, day out as Coach Karl. So I'm going to give Coach Karl the floor, and I want him to tell us about your experience working with kids. And we just talked earlier before we got live about the dropout rate. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about that. Go ahead, Coach.
Sure. Well, let's start out with the negative, and that is the number of kids that drop out of our sport in soccer. We found that between the ages of 10 to 14, 75% of the children quit. And obviously, you have to interview the kids that quit to find out what the problems were. The majority of the people or the adults think that it's because the kids aren't having any fun. Well, if you interview a teenager and you find out why they quit a sport, in almost 90% of the cases, because they don't have the basic skills. And if you can't play the game correctly, if you don't have the basics, then why continue? Because all of a sudden you have peer group pressure where you're noticing that either your players, teammates, or the spectators on the sidelines are noticing that you're a failure. And why would you want to continue something that you're not good at? So one of the things that I try to get across to people is the first thing that you need to do is somehow create an environment where the child loves to play the game, loves to play it first. Then you can start working on the basic skills.
Right. And so how do you get a child to love the game? I mean, this, we're talking, obviously you're involved in soccer, but let's just say any other game, or what would you do? What would you recommend?
Well, in soccer, what I do is I make sure the child understands what we're doing, and I put them in charge of everything that is done. So for example, the very first thing I try to teach coaches or adults is to teach the child how to lay out their own environment. And I know we talked about this before, but let's say, for example, in basketball, which most Americans are familiar with, is how do you get a child to love to play? Well, you find a small basket that's the size of the child so that they can actually mimic the people that they see on TV. So we don't have them shoot at a 10-foot basket, with an adult-sized ball. We get equipment that's conducive to their size where they can actually perform and do the particular skill. So in soccer, for example, it's a natural thing to kick a ball. But now you have to teach the child, what are we going to do with that particular ball? And the first thing they have to do is be successful. So one of the things that my foundation is the figure eight. I call it the figure eight routine. What we do is we put down 2 cones, and I teach the child how to lay down those cones. We start out by putting the feet together, go to the left side, count to 3, feet back together, go to the right side, count to 3. And by the way, and this is very important, when you teach a child, you don't face them. What you do is you stand next to them so you're facing in the same direction. The reason that you don't face them, and again, this is over years of experience, if I asked you to raise your right hand, and let's do that right now while we're this far apart, but raise your right hand. Okay, raise your left hand. Okay, so if I'm teaching you right and left, we're opposites. So the child isn't going to succeed. But if you stand next to the child, now if I was next to you, I'd say raise your right hand. Now we'd be doing it together, and we would be doing it correctly. So anytime that you're teaching a child, is they want to succeed first, they have to be able to lay down their own environment, and then give them instructions that they understand. So now we've got the 2 cones laid out, and you ask the child to go in a figure 8. Obviously, you have to demonstrate to the real little ones that may not know what a figure eight is, but you just go around one cone, go around the other cone, and eventually what will happen is they will do it naturally, where once they go around this cone here, they'll use their right foot, and eventually they'll use their left foot. And what's really crucial in our sport is we have players that if they're one-footed, they won't be successful because we'll figure out where to force them. We force them to the weaker foot. They're not successful. If they fail, again, they look bad in front of their peers. In the 18 years, if the ball's taken away every time, why should I play this game if I'm not good at it? Right.
You had indirectly, you've touched on a couple of points, and I'm gonna kind of allude to them a little bit here. One is learning by imitation. That's critical because kids are always visually dominant, and they're like they want to watch. How's it done? And they imitate their peers, right? The other one was internal locus of control. And this kind of leads me to my segue into Professor Joe Levy. He used to be my professor, and I took a course to boost up my GPA. And, I thought it was called Theories of Play. I'm thinking, how hard is that? Turns out to be an essay every week. So I ended up doing well in it. And I actually enjoyed the class. And, you could tell the value of something when years later, you're still thinking about it. And Dr. Joe kind of was a really nice guy. You could always go up to him and talk to him, and he would love to just sit down with you and have a coffee with you. And so I exploited that a couple of times, and we had some nice discussions. And one of the things was, what I learned from there was three things. One was intrinsic motivation. Play has to be driven from the inside. The other was suspension of reality, basically pretending, make believe. And the third thing, we just talked about that, was the internal locus of control. So the idea that the child kind of determines the flow of how they want to play. So all of a sudden they could change a different direction. There is, and which leads me to my next point. You don't have a lot of rules, which is really nice for a kid. You just have some basic rules. But then after that, you kind of, explain what you do.
Well, Yusuf, the very first thing, and you just finished talking about it, was your professor was available to you to answer questions. And
Yes.
What we have to do as adults is we have to approach the child at their level. One of the things that I see as coaches, they're standing up, they're at, 5 feet, 10 inches tall and above, talking to a child, which is intimidating, and the child doesn't understand. What we have to do is get to their level, which means eye to eye when you're giving instructions. So I ask the coaches, anytime that you're talking to a player that might be 4 feet 2 inches tall, make sure that you're 4 feet 2 inches tall when you're talking to them. After you finish making your point, and this is again crucial, is make sure that you have the child tell you what you just said. In other words, the child needs to understand what your instruction you're trying to make. You can't just assume, like we always do with adults, like I'm talking to you right now and I'm assuming everything I say you understand. Well, fortunately, you're one of these strange people that's actually taking a note so that you can go back to figure out what I said a few minutes ago. Now, if I were to finish asking you right now, what was my first point, then I would know that you understood. So my question is, what's the first point that I just made?
That's a good question. I'm just listening to your stuff right now. I'm stuck in the moment, but I got to say, basically, we talked about the idea of dropout rates, and that in soccer, basically between ages of between 10 to 14 is about 75% dropout rate. And the reason why is because the kids are not developed, they haven't developed their skill properly, and they get the peer pressure from obviously people are watching and stuff like that. And so they feel, well, why should I practice something I'm not good at? And which comes back to this idea of making it fun so they can develop the skill, right? And this is where I think you do a really good job of this, where you teach people the skill of soccer, but they don't even realize they're playing soccer. And that's the key. That's how good and I remember talking to you about the 9-step process you have. I was really looking at it, thinking, wow, so there's some brilliant concepts in here that can be applied, and that's why I brought you back on, because the concepts that you bring, I think, need to transcend soccer. They need to go into all sports. And I know people tend to view things very tunnel vision, and it's only soccer. I mean, you can take what you're talking about right here and apply it across the board. And this is one of the things I think that's really missing, is exactly some of the things that you're talking about. So, and I applaud you for doing what you're doing, because I think that's what I see anyways with kids in hockey over here and stuff. There's too much emphasis on the game, but not emphasis on skill, and definitely not enough emphasis on having fun. And the parents don't get that. They don't understand that, just let the kids they'll figure out a way. And every kid is not going to be a Wayne Gretzky or a Mario Lemieux or Connor McDavid. But all these guys at one point in time, I mean, I remember Wayne Gretzky, they used to have a backyard rink. It was only big enough for one net and maybe a little bit of frontage in front. And Gretzky used to play every day after school. He used to just pretend. Here's a key word right here, pretend. He's Stanley Cup final, 7th game. It's in overtime, last goal wins, and he's he couldn't really move around too much, but so he developed this whole thing from behind the net. That was his, they used to call it the office. Gretzky's office he was behind the net, because at behind the net, the goalie could not see you properly. Again, the goalie has to be focused also in front. And at the same time, but I think really is because he didn't have enough space in that rink. So he could only view one or two places, either in front of the net or behind the net. And if he was in front of the net, you're going to get, he would pretend to be other, defensemen and stuff like that. So he used to go behind the net. And from there, you had this, so he changed the style of hockey. And one of the key things here was he used to play for hours by himself. Like, he used to just, pretend. And Michael Jordan, the same thing. All these top guys used to play. And I want to get into this idea real quickly.
Yusuf, if I could stop you.
Sure.
Here's a perfect example of, I asked you a question, which was, what was my point that I was trying to make? And we as adults have a very difficult time listening and understanding. So when I asked you the question of what was my point, which was to get at the child's level, 4 feet 2 inches tall, make sure you're eye to eye when you're contacting. If you noticed yourself, what you did is you looked at your notes and you went all the way back to, well, this is the number of kids that quit. And then you went on and you talked about Gretzky and all these other things, rather than just answering the question. So you have to remember, adults get carried away with listening, and children are even worse.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So when you say something to a child, make sure that after you're finished, ask them what they heard. Because if they don't understand what they heard, they can't be successful at what you're trying to teach. So I thank you for making a very good example of how everybody does work with other people. As I'm talking, adults start thinking about other things or their own answer rather than listening. Children are even worse, because their attention span is about, maybe if you're lucky, 5 to 10 seconds.
Mine's probably less.
If you say, well, you did a good job. So thank you for being a good candidate.
No problem. So I want to just touch a little bit here on a few things here. One is the idea of parts of the brain when you're playing, and when you're in that play mode state, okay? And when you're in that play state, you're using the higher brain centers, which is the neocortex. That's the big stuff, all the stuff from what you can see, right? And then you go deeper into the brain, you get into what we call the limbic system. So this deals with mammalian brain, or basically feeding, caring, right? And then you get into what we call the reptilian brain, which is the brain stem and stuff. And that's usually when you get in a flight or fright. So when you put the kid under stress, so here's an interesting thing here. When the kid is under stress, they typically you would use both hemispheres of your brain, but we all have one dominant. Generally speaking, we have one, left brain, right brain, and the right brain is more creative, let's just say. Left brain is more logic centered. But let's just say a kid is right brain, but he also uses a bit of his left brain as well. But when he gets stressed out, a good 75 to 90% of that left brain is shut off. So he's only got right brain. He's only right brained. And so now he's using 50% or, maybe he's using a lot less on the other hemisphere. So his ability to make decisions decreases. But when you're in the play mode, you're accessing both hemispheres. And so if you orchestrate things, like you said, like how you would, limit the size of the field or the playing surface, the implements that you use are kid size for their hands, instruction wise, all these giving what I call chunking this information down, a little small, like to kick a ball. Well, there's obviously, you would know better, but there's different stages to kick a ball, pulling your leg back and then making sure you hit the right target on the ball, and you want to go this way, all these sort of things. You break it down. So you break these elements down and you chunk it. And meanwhile, like what you're doing is you're constantly stimulating that neocortex, which allows for creativity, allows for more thinking, critical, because now the child is aware of what they're doing. But if you stress them out with yelling at them and stuff like that, they go into that limbic or reptilian brain, which is now they get fixated. And so now their ability to acquire a skill, I think, is compromised. You want to add to that? Go right ahead.
Well, I guess I'm going to start with the word stress. Young children, I don't know if they even know how to spell the word. And if they don't know how to spell something, then I don't think they understand. And to get not as complicated, and the way I look at it is this way. I don't think that children get stressed. I think what happens is they just don't understand. They haven't been taught the expectations. So if you're asking them, to walk on a balance beam, or you're asking them to kick a ball or stand on one leg, if they can't do it, they'll do something that's natural to them, which is what? They'll either start crying, or they'll quit, or they'll just give up. So what an understanding adult has to do is make sure that they guide them towards success again. To me, that's the key. The child needs to understand what your expectations are of them. So if you're asking them to kick a ball, you don't expect them to kick the ball 50 yards. You might ask them to just push the ball maybe 2 or 3 inches. And if they're successful at doing that, your response to their action has to be positive. And eventually, when they understand that, that the ball, they're trying to get it 50 yards and it's not going 50, now that's when the adult says, okay, we need a lot of repetition, but you can't get the repetition out of them unless they're successful to begin with.
Right. I think you hit a key point there, is positive reinforcement. And always sort of, I remember one coach telling me, he said, always leave the practice, find something that the kid is good at, and end the practice with that. Even though the other stuff didn't quite pick up, don't worry about that. End with something that's positive, because they'll remember, and you can maybe allude to this, they'll remember the last thing of the practice.
Mm-hmm. So very quickly, I can explain to you that one of the things that I ask the coaches to do is to have a theme. And that means that the theme might be, and I'll call it a step over, step over the ball with the right foot, take it with the left foot. And if you start the practice letting the players know what you are going to focus on, you will also let them know that they can make mistakes the rest of the practice on everything else. So in other words, what the coach does says to themselves that I'm going to focus on the step over. If they make a mistake, we'll work on it in a future practice. So from the beginning of the practice, which is demonstration, explanation, to the end of the practice, all the coach should be focusing on is that one particular technique, going either against an individual, a small group, or a team. So what you have to go back to is focus on one item per practice, make sure that they are successful at it by the end. And when we have, this is step number 8 in my practice session, the cool down, make sure that you compliment every individual on what they did well during that practice. And if you have a child who wasn't successful with the step over, maybe they did something that you noticed, and it might be picking up the cones at the end or complimenting another player. You want to make some kind of a compliment, because one of the difficult things that I have found coaches having is to compliment a child who's not very good at technique or not very good at soccer. But we do focus, obviously, on the ones that are very good at doing it. They don't need the compliments. It's the one who's not good at it. Because the one who's good at it, in most cases, you know, they think they've already got it made, and they won't listen to the compliment. But the one who can't do it yet, he'll practice harder, you know, per age group again, because the young ones, none of them can do it correctly. As they get older, you're going to find some of them, they'll start doing it correctly, and those are the ones that in most cases drop out at 14, 15 because they don't start working on increasing their level of skill.
Right. Let me ask you something. And you've been doing this for how many years now?
How about 40 plus?
Okay, so in that 40 years, have you had any of these kids come back to you and say, Coach Karl, thank you so much. And any of these kids basically reached a higher level with the basic fundamentals that you've taught them?
You know, my compliment is if the individual who 40 years ago came to one of my sessions or became a player and now comes back and gives back to the game, that's my compliment. So in other words, they stuck around instead of, you know, quitting and all this kind of stuff. As a player, they played well, they were successful, possibly they weren't successful, but if they came back and what do we call that, a follow-up or something like that? Oh, pay it forward.
Pay it forward, okay.
Yeah,
right.
So if they stayed in the game, and I've got individuals now that are grandparents who are coaching their grandchildren.
Wow.
That's my compliment.
Wow. And your program is available, obviously, in California, but is it available up here in Canada as well?
You know, I've been working with John de Benedictis, who is now, I believe, the executive director of the Canadian NSC2A.
Yes.
And so, no, I've been to Toronto, come to think of it. They actually had me interviewed at one of the radio stations. We went around and did courses at several of the elementary schools. So, no, I've been to Canada a few times.
Okay.
Including, where is it that they have the races? Calgary.
Calgary, okay, yeah.
I went to Calgary, and you're going to love this one because I know you're up in Canada and hockey. The people from the Hockey Association came in, and they started applying some of the things that I taught them. In soccer, they applied it into ice hockey.
Yeah, I think this is my point. This is why I brought you back on, because I think your message, and again, you're better to iterate this message than me, because you work in this reality. I don't work every day in, day out with kids. I mean, the youngest kid I think I have is like 12 or 13 years old. But even with that said, at 12, 13, they're still in that play mode. There's a lot of play still in there. So you got to somehow or the other make a competition out of it, or make something that, make it fun for them. And it's difficult. It's difficult, and it's challenged me a lot in terms of coaching, because obviously I know what I do, and, as little I know, whatever. But I know how to, teach people how to do certain things. But then how do you get a younger mind who basically very, attention span is, limited to a certain degree. And how do you get that person focused on something that, is somewhat not necessarily play? It's not a game. There's this, you're lifting something or you're moving an object. So we use a lot of medicine balls. Kids love to throw things. and they like to catch. And so medicine balls, I find, are a great way to teach kids strength training, and at the same time get them to play because they didn't realize they're doing it. The other thing about medicine balls is really nice, and this is why my pet peeve against using barbells or any sort of implements other than that, because there's a lot of physiological development that has to occur in the muscle and the bone. The bones are very elastic, and the muscles are very. The bones are growing faster than the muscle, and so if you put them under weight training, you create a lot of rigidity in the muscles. But when you're doing medicine ball, if you throw in a medicine ball, there's a lot of elongation of muscles. There's a lot of elasticity involved. And those fibers that are needed for elasticity, they need to be developed, because if you give the kid too much slow stuff, what happens is that you'll convert those fibers into a kid is naturally fast twitch or very elastic. You'll make them into a slower player later on. So you need to get activities that foster this fast, rapid movement without having to put the kid under duress or any sort of load. And also, especially with medicine balls, the neat thing about it is everybody throws it. The body finds the best way to move the ball, right? And as long as the ball is not too heavy, the body will find a way how to move it. And if you sometimes manipulate certain variables, you can actually improve the throwing of that ball or catching of that ball. So I find medicine balls are often underlooked. And not the hard ones too. This is a big problem with medicine balls. They need to be soft. They need to be soft because you got little hands and you got little fingers. And sometimes the ball, they don't always catch it at the right portion of the hand. If the ball is hard, you can bend the finger back, or if the ball is soft, they don't also feel the slap as well. Because sometimes that's the other thing. The ball is hard. It's like I know hard object coming on the hand. It's like a slap to the hand, right? Nobody likes to get slapped. So I find implements like that are very good. But I just want to go back a little bit here.
Well, Yusuf, let me stay with what you just finished, because you're talking about motivating teenagers. Okay, all you need to do is, we call it self-motivation. And what you do is instead of comparing them to other individuals within their age group, what you have them do is you take the statistic, like in your case, let's say that they're able to lift 5 pounds. Well, have them go home and see if the next time they come back, they can lift 6. Right? So what you do is you don't compare them to others, but they have to be motivated themselves to try to improve. And you're the one that has to do the stimulating by saying, geez, you did great today. Let's see if you can do another few ounces. Throwing the medicine ball. We don't take statistics on that, right? We don't say, well, you threw it 2 feet. We just go, oh, that's really a good catch or whatever. Well, next time, see if they can do it 2 feet and 3 inches. So what you want to do is you want to motivate them. And always what you just finished saying, I think is very important, is they should be doing the repetitions the way that it would be in the game. So you don't do slow kicks versus semi kicks, You kick the ball the way that you would do it in the game. So I always ask the coaches to ask themselves, if it happens in the game, do it in practice. If it doesn't happen in the game, why bother practicing it? But the child needs to know where they're at. That's why I think computer games are so popular. They'll let you know, oh, you're doing well right now. Well, all of a sudden, they screwed up. Well, where do they have to go? They have to go all the way back to the beginning to get to the level they were at in order to increase their level. And I think it's the same thing here. Make sure that they know what their level is, and then you motivate them to go to the next level.
So you talked about a point, and maybe you could fill in a few gaps here. You said demonstration, then you said explanation.
Right.
Or explanation first, demonstrate, and then positive reinforcement, okay? Then you want to compliment, okay? And from your last talk, I remember, you mentioned the idea of giving them some homework, correct?
All right. So let's go through that list again, but let's start off with demonstration explanation.
Okay.
Either the coach does the demonstration, which has to be visibly correct. So in other words, the child's, what do you call that, computer inside of our brain takes a picture of what the movement should look like. So you have a demonstration. If the coach can't do it, they should find somebody who can do it correctly. It could be a player on the team, or it could be a guest that comes in and gives the demonstration correctly. At the time that they're talking about as they're doing the demonstration, they should be talking their way through it. So, for example, if we're doing a, a step over, it's the right foot over the ball, the left foot takes it. So the right foot fakes, the left foot takes. The demonstrator goes through those particular talks, and he used the buzzwords like right foot over, right foot fake, left foot take. When the players then do try it themselves, they have to repeat those words. I call it self-talk. And I don't have the kids do it quietly. They actually, as they're using the movement, I have them say it out loud, right foot fake, left foot take. So what they're doing is they're mimicking the individual who did the demonstration explanation. And after a little while, hopefully once the movement is better, hopefully the mind has already been recorded, and we do it quieter and quieter. But I have the little ones, they're talking all the time as they're doing the movement.
Right. And then obviously through that, you're giving positive reinforcement, and you're trying to pick out complimenting them at the end. Now, with regards to homework, what do you recommend for coaches to do? I mean, obviously, you want them to practice some of these skills, because the practice makes, perfect practice makes permanent.
That's a big problem, right? So if the demonstration explanation is poor and the kids don't do it right, they may do it wrong. But here's the key again, is you might have an individual who, let's say they do the step over just a little bit different. That's what we're looking for. We want the individual to be successful for themselves against an opponent. And it doesn't matter if they do it, by the book. If they do it their way, because some of us are taller, some of us shorter, some of us are fast, some of us are slow, they have to be able to be, again, successful. If they're not successful at it, then now the coach has to slow things down and maybe give another demonstration explanation. Or, and I like this much, to me, this is the biggest key, is I like for the players to teach each other. So if one of the players has the movement down, they teach the player who's having a difficult time. I don't think that we relate as well to kids as kids relate to each other. And so my preference is find the best player, hook them up with the weaker player, and let those two work it out. And as a homework assignment, hopefully the kids live close to each other. Now at home, those players get together in their backyard or their neighborhood, and they work at it at home rather than always being under, the eye of the coach, where the kids think they might make a mistake, and we want them a way to do it naturally. Instinctively, I think is what you want to call it.
Yeah, I think this is the idea of, you kind of let the kid sort of find his own way to do it, and it's like internal locus of control. This is what Joe Levy was alluding to, right? Where the kid finds his own way to sort of figure out how to do things here. I'm going to add one more thing here, is the idea of free play. So when you put your practices together, is there some sort of like, I like seeing kids just kind of, for 10, 15 minutes or whatever, just muck about, and then they'll figure out something. And I find there's not enough of that free play, I think, in coaching, and they spend too much time instructions, and then there's not enough time at the end for just, okay, let's just play. Let's just focus on let's see if we can use some of these skills that we've learned in this game and figure out how to use them. I don't know, your take.
Well, it's real simple. If we went through the 9 steps, as you recall, I had it broken down where we had plus games, plus addition, coach adds information, or players learn using stoppages. That's phase number 1, where the coach teaches the players. So there are stoppages. He'll work on the children that are having a difficult time. But then after we teach, and let's take, for example, the 1+1, we teach, we stop, we make corrections, the kids cooperate. And then we go to the 1 versus 1, VS. And I'm going to ask you a question that I taught you now twice. Let's see, what does the V and the S stand for?
The V, VS, not versus, is it?
I already gave you that answer, so it's not versus, obviously, but versus is competition, right?
I think it's like, if you remember in soccer, because I work with Armando Costa, God bless me, passed away, but he used to, V1V or something like that, like, I think it's like one versus one, right? I think something like that.
Right.
Is that correct?
No.
Okay.
V and the S. You're going to have to remember this because I'll ask you every time that we get together.
All right.
The V stands for the coaches verbally, and the S stands for silent. So after you teach, then you test. There's your free play. Anytime that you're teaching something, you are stopping the kids, you're making your corrections. As soon as you're finished making all those, they have to have free play. So in other words, teach, test, teach, test, talk, verbally silent, be verbal, be verbally silent. And each one of those steps, if you're doing 1 versus 1, if you're doing small-sided games, if you're doing scrimmages, you must always have a teaching portion where you stop the kids and they understand, or you have a testing portion where it's free play and the kids are left alone. And remember what I told you, as soon as I said your name, if I said Yusuf, what would you have to do during the during the cooperative time? During the 1+1, as soon as I am going to add information, I called your name and I said, Yusuf, what do you have to do?
I'm going to turn and face you. Okay.
Remember? Hit,
yes.
Give the signal, peace, and smile.
Okay. Basically, acknowledging attention. That's basically what you're doing.
Right. Now we're back to, what I'm teaching you, and your answer is, I'm asking you, what did you just learn? And you're saying, yes, I'm ready to learn a little bit more.
Okay, so almost like asking the athlete or the kid, are you ready to learn almost, which is interesting, as opposed to you going right into it and they're not in that mindset to maybe accept information. Brilliant.
Right.
I love that.
Right. So you have to prepare them, right? You prepare them, you teach them, and then you give free play. Now they put on their serious face. There's no stoppages. There's none of this. Now it's free play. And if they're having a good time, you'll actually hear them laughing as they're competing.
You know what? You said a very important point there right at the end. Laughter. I love that. That is something I don't think coaches even listen for. But if they're giggling and having fun and chatting and say, wow, okay, they love it. This is good. This is a good thing, right? And I think that's a missed point. That might just be the takeaway point for the whole thing. If the kids are not laughing, you're not doing a good job coaching. Now let me ask you something here.
Well, let's add something while you're on laughter.
Go ahead.
Let's add something really quick. As you're given instructions, remember we were at their level, eye to eye. What you don't want to do is, again, visual perception of the child. You don't want to look serious as you're given instructions. Make sure that you're smiling. In other words, we're cooperating, and I'm going to make you a better player by relaxing you into teaching you how you can become a little bit better. So don't be serious and look into them, very stern as you're teaching.
So let me ask you something here. I can see some of this stuff actually applying to working with adults.
Absolutely. We're big children, aren't we?
I swear to God, some of this stuff here, I'm thinking, because I play with my my teenage guys, right? We have some fun. We have a game we play with the medicine ball throws, right? And the reason why the game came about is because these guys would just throw this medicine ball against a rebounder, and the ball would fly everywhere. So I have a small facility, and I didn't want the ball. It's a softer ball, but still, I mean, it gets flying around. It gets, things get, tossed. So I figure, you know what? I got to get these guys to aim and focus on the target. So we have this game called the tart game. And so the idea is that if you throw it, you want to throw it hard, no problem. But if the ball comes back and you miss the catch, that's 1 point. Every 10 points, and it's cumulative, it goes from every practice. Every 10 points, I get half a dozen Portuguese tarts. So my clients are very determined not to give me tarts. And my game, my strategy is I provide subtle talk while they're doing it to kind of throw them off their game.
See, so right there, we're back to what I told you, self-motivation.
Yeah, exactly. And they focus. They all of a sudden focus on what they got to do, because they don't want, except for one guy. He's I'm waiting for my tarts next week. He owes me. But yeah, these kids, basically, that's how I get them to focus sometimes. I make a game out of it. I said, okay, if you don't do this, I get a point. In so many points, you got to do, it's either I do push-ups or you do push-ups or something like that. Something where basically they get motivated to do something, and they ended up getting more focused in what they're doing, which is exactly what I want. So
the only thing that I would add to that is don't make it a negative.
Yeah, that's true too. Yes, I agree. Yeah. Well, I do share the tarts though. I do share tarts.
That's
I think they get one. They get one.
You get 10 and they get 1, right?
Well, it's usually half a dozen. So I get 5. They get 1. I give them 1. We share it. We sit down. We share it after the workout. So.
And I'm almost sure that you also talk about how they've improved on hitting that target correctly.
Oh yeah, like when they do well, I always every rep or whatever they're doing, I'll tell them, okay, good, this is good, doing well. Like I'm always giving them that reinforcement. Like, and they like to hear that. Obviously, anybody wants to hear some compliments, right?
Sure.
But yeah, I think some of the stuff here, I can see how working with older athletes, some of the stuff can still apply. So it's not just for kids. And I think that's another takeaway here. We talked about laughter as a big takeaway, at least from my perspective here. But the idea here now is like, can we apply this to older adults in terms of how we would teach them to do certain skills instead of yelling at them, treating them with a certain level of respect and whatnot. I think, and this is a big thing now, I think in sports too, they're starting to get into some of the coaches, players can report coaches and that kind of stuff. So I think that's kind of lends into all this, what we're talking about, where if the whole coaching style changes, you're not gonna have some of that irrespective, if you want to add to that, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, the approach that I use, I don't just use it with little kids. I use it with adults. When I do coaching courses, I treat the adults just like I do the kids. And what's very important with older players is the verbiage that you use. So, for example, I've done this experiment over and over, even in Toronto, where I had one group doing a drill. I had another group doing the exact same thing, but they were playing a game. Which one of the two groups do you think had more enjoyable time and wanted to play longer? And which one do you think wanted to quit?
The game, obviously.
Yeah, the games wanted to continue. The ones drill, man, before they even walked out there, they were really discouraged. So it's the verbiage that you use and the way that you approach the individual. And this is probably the most difficult thing that a coach has to do with older players. You need to be able to adjust your personality to the individual, because some kids, everything's a joke. To other kids, everything is serious, and you've got the ones in between. So unless you get to know your individual, and I'm talking, with the older age groups, especially adults, unless you get to know the individual, you can't reach them. So, we have to be I don't know what you call it, psycho or multi whatever, we have to have so many personalities, but we need to know the individual that we're working with first before we can actually reach them and teach them.
I think that's a good idea. That's a good point too. So to sum up, I would say a few things. I'm just going to reiterate Dr. Joe Levy's 3 things for play. intrinsic motivation, suspension of reality, and internal locus of control. And if these things are met, you're going to have laughter, and you're going to have you can have more like learning, and you know, have the kids are going to absorb more when they're playing. And I think that's the key takeaway. When you're playing something, you don't realize time goes by. Time suspends itself, and you're in the moment. And so part of your you know, working those higher brain centers, you're more apt to retain that skill, start developing, as opposed to, you know, when you're being yelled at, all these things, or the field is too big and the kid, you know, you're too small and the implements are not the right size. You know, I will sum that up into ease of success. You always want to make that a successful, enjoyable experience. They should be able to remember you, just like you told me. You know, you have some players that are grandparents now, and they're giving back. They're paying it forward because obviously the experience that they had with you was extremely enjoyable, and they figure, you know what, I want to give this enjoyment back to my grandkids or my children. And I think that's a key thing there. And would you say not to take it too seriously?
You know, let me end up with what I think is very sad. Nowadays, we actually have the adults have to teach the children how to play. In our day, and I'm sure you went through the same thing, we had older kids in the neighborhood who taught us how to play those particular games on our own. So now what we need to do, unfortunately, is we have to have coaching courses where we teach these adults to make sure, or not to make sure, but how to reach the kids. And again, it goes back to make sure that they understand, make sure that if you make a point, you ask them a question if they understood, and then they have to be successful. And the success may not be physically, but it may be verbally, because you may have a child who can answer the questions correctly, but can't do it physically. Make sure you compliment them for it and make them feel like they're a better player, even though they can't do it physically. If they understand, eventually they will be able to do it.
Yeah. I remember growing up as a kid, my uncles used to, you know, you'd go see them. And one of my uncles, he passed away, God bless him. But every time we saw him, we knew we were going to get some chocolate. And so we used to get these little Nestle chocolates. And all the kids, we used to have a bunch of cousins, right? And when we used to see him, right, we all used to he used to tell everybody, okay, line up. And everybody come to him and he said, "You been a good boy, girl, you know?" And he's, "Yeah." You go, "Yeah." And you got scolded 2 minutes ago. He'd still give you one. And then I remember other uncles that give you, you know, here's 50 cents or here's a buck, go buy something, you know. So it's a sort of, you know, I was thinking maybe coaches should be handing out some chocolate, maybe some cash too. I don't know. Would that violate the amateur professional?
You know, I'm not big on all of these awards. I think that the kids should enjoy just playing.
I agree.
You know, as soon as we start giving them awards, what are you going to give them when they've had the chocolates, they've had the trips, they've had everything by the age of 12?
Well, next thing you know, they're going to get agents because you're giving them cash. You're thinking, okay, the agent's going to come in there and say, okay, where's my cut? Exactly. Can you get more if you play on another team? What the other coach giving you? Yeah. So maybe you're teaching them about life, but it's from a bad way. Anyways,
so go ahead. Can you send the people to my webpage?
Yes. Okay. So let's recap. So what's the webpage, Coach Karl?
It's 3 W's. Fundamentalsoccer.com.
Fundamentalsoccer.com. Okay.
Yes.
Fundamentalsoccer.com. And the key word here is fun. So
it's always capitalized. It's always capitalized.
Okay. And if they want to get so they can get a hold of you there, Coach Karl?
Yes.
Do you have any other social media, or you still working on it?
They can reach me through, I'm on Facebook.
On Facebook as well? Okay.
And LinkedIn.
Okay.
But they can also reach me on my email address, which is KOACH
Yep. Koach. Yep.
KARL
Yep.
at
Yep.
fundamentalsoccer.com.
Fundamental. I'm just going to write this down because I'm going to put this in the description. Soccer.
Well, I'm glad you're writing it down. That way you'll remember it.
Exactly. I always do this,
Rather
man.
than me talking and I know you're not listening to me.
No. I make notes. Everybody, when I do a podcast, I'm writing down notes because I also want to sometimes maybe add a few things. But if there's key points, this is very good. Then I can always go back and they want to come back. Sometimes, you know what? Hey, I said something, but I don't remember it. I can always let me look at my notes here. I can always do that. So, Coach Karl, again, I really appreciate your time, and I wish more people would sort of reach out to you. I'm going to definitely put your contact information. And just to kind of sum up a little bit here, I definitely think this transcends soccer. And I think this is what your message is, the 9 steps, I believe, that should definitely, people should look into that, irrespective of your sport, because the knowledge that you will gain on how to work with your athlete will then make them into a better person and a better athlete. And I want to stress the person first, then the athlete, because you're always giving them the positive reinforcement, and you're helping them, giving them confidence, self-esteem, all these good things, which basically should come from coaching. Unfortunately, the reality is it doesn't quite always come out that way. So, parting words, real quick.
Parting words, my motto: the outcome of our children is infinitely more important than the outcome of any game they will ever play.
Love it. I love that. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. We got to have you back again somehow or the other. And we'll keep in touch.
Truly my pleasure, and hopefully next time you'll listen a little bit better when I ask you the question. Answer it.
All right.
Thank you, Yusuf.
All right. Take care.
You
Bye.
too.
Bye.
TheSystem.ca podcast disclaimer. We're not here to tell you that we know everything. We're just here to present possibilities. The information presented is by no way intended as medical advice or as a substitute for medical counseling. The information should be used in conjunction with the guidance and care of your physician. Consult your physician before beginning this program, as you would with any other exercise nutrition program. If you choose not to obtain consent of your physician and or work with your physician throughout the duration of your time using the recommendations given, you are agreeing to accept full responsibility for your actions. By continuing, you recognize that despite all precautions on the part of the system, the art and science of coaching, there are risks of injuries or illness which can occur because of your use of the aforementioned information, and you expressly assume risks and waive, relinquish, and release any claim which you have against the system, the art and science of coaching, or any of its affiliates as a result of any future physical or illness incurred in connection with or as a result of the use or misuse of this information given. All rights reserved. No part of this publication may be reproduced, distributed, or transmitted in any form or by any means, including photocopying, recording, or any other electronic or mechanical methods, without the prior written permission of the system, the art and science of coaching, except in the case of brief quotations embodied in critical reviews and certain other non-commercial uses permitted by copyright law. Thank you. Thanks for tuning in. If you like the content, please hit the subscribe button. Check out TheSystem.ca for more information on services and more content like this, and also products. Take care.